Coaches, we're live today.
Nice.
All right. The very entertaining.
You're live.
Coordinator Andy Kotelnicki here.
That's right. Good to see everyone again. Let's get started. Fire away.
Here you go, Matt. Take.
Me again. Sweet. Man. Hey, I asked Lance this, and I'd love to get your input too. Other than the talent in the room, the running back room, what are some ways you think or know that position and your production there is going to be better this year, or at least hope?
Well, almost 20 years of coaching experience, first of all, right? Just seeing guys run around and how they do in the live periods that we have had. You know, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that tackles are getting broken. You know what I mean?
Okay.
You know, there's more of that stuff happening.
Mm-hmm.
You see in the thud periods that we have, right? Because, you know, you have to go limited amount of live reps, right? You know, in fall camp. And in your thud periods, you see vision and running with low pads and intent to get extra yards, right? And so you just observe those things, you know, from every one of those guys. Gives you confidence that, to your point, there's depth, right? You know, which you want. You know, we've talked about that before, and we want to be able to run the football well here. I think that's you know, every championship team is able to do that, right? At every level, they're able to effectively run the football, and you have good running backs to do that, right? And so that competition in that room, and the additions of guys that we've had, and the development of the guys that are still here is important to our success, and they're doing that well.
The microphone's on your side if anyone has a question.
Curious for your position group, the tight ends, and you mentioned being able to run the ball effectively there. How have that position group as a whole taken a step forward in run blocking?
Well, you know, it's one of our camp objectives. We said we want to figure out who and how well we can block C and D gaps, as we say, right? Because that's kind of what they do, and they've really embraced that. I think is probably as a group, that's been the biggest improvement that I've been able to see in the how many ever months we've been here, is that they're willing to go in there, which is a step for those guys. But then we have to, of course, and we're always looking for the all-around tight end, right, where you can go in there and get dirty, but we don't want to just have a bunch of glorified offensive linemen, you know, wearing 80s numbers. We want to have guys that can be legitimate, you know, threats in the pass game as well and get completions. And so they've been able to do that. We put a lot on their plate with assignments and everything like that, and they've handled it well. You know what I mean? They're physical, right, and they've embraced that. They understand that.
And in terms of the offensive scheme, doing the outside zone stuff this time last year, having to teach it, how much growth have you seen in the course of this fall camp, and how much does it help that now you don't have to teach, you can kind of focus on other stuff?
You know, we're a lot further along. I've said that, I think, when we were here after the second practice, right? Okay. And to add how many ever more practices since, I don't know how many we finished today. Where are we at? Is it 16 today, maybe? 15? Exactly, right? I don't even know what day it is. It's camp, right? So to see how much we've grown in that time gives you confidence, you know what I mean? You know, and I've said before, the important thing in coaching, I think, is to really figure out what your guys are capable of, you know, and what are the limitations, what do you want to do or not want to do, and what can they do and can't do, and then to make sure those packages grow. And so to have that much more time to hone in on what we want to be able to do up front has been a blessing, right, of course, for our guys, and to have our first spring last spring and to get into as many practices as we had this fall, you're really starting to get a clear picture of that stuff. But there's our run game has developed a lot. I'm excited about it.
Yeah. With someone like Daniel Highshaw, then, what have you seen from him now getting to go through the full fall camp, and what has he done to kind of stand out to you?
Well, you know, I mean, a year ago we didn't get to see him take a rap. You know, we got to see the first time we ever see him carry a ball was in spring football, and so now to have that, and he goes into fall camp, and now he's got, like I said, whatever, how many it is, 15, I think it's 14. I don't even know, guys, honestly. It's somewhere, it's in the teens, right, of camp, of practices. He's gaining confidence in what we're doing. He's gaining vision on what's going on, right? And the thing that we're looking for out of all those guys in that room when we talk about the competition there is you're looking for the consistency to be able to do it over and over again. And you can't evaluate consistency unless you're able to kind of see a big picture, right, over the course of a number of practices, right? You can look great in one practice, but if the next two you don't look good, you know, that's an issue. So Daniel's been able to show some consistency, as well as other guys in the room throughout fall camp.
You and Lance and Jim have talked about Dean having some of his best practices since day one. What are you seeing from him then that gives you the idea that he is developing, he is building? What kind of maybe challenges did you give him during the offseason to come back with and try to address?
Well, he, you know, is understanding what we're doing, right? I think the competition in the room helps everybody, as we've talked about here before. That makes the whole football program better if you have competition in that room. But his understanding of what we're doing, his anticipation, and his ability to react to a stimulus has changed immensely. He's still fast, right, which is good. And so when he does carry the ball or gets out and scrambles, it's an impressive level of speed. But those things for him are grown, or we're a lot further along than we were a year ago with him that way.
Is there, I know we talked a little bit about this in the spring and kind of the way you guys can use him given his speed and his versatility we saw at the end of last season when Jalen was starting. Are there ways that you can use him maybe outside of throwing the ball that you plan on doing? Or how do you just balance taking advantage of his skill set versus him just being a backup quarterback?
Well, I you know, and I've said before in this room, you know, your personnel dictates what you do. And we have some depth at a lot of different positions, right? We can talk about a bunch of receivers, talk about a bunch of running backs, talk about 2 quarterbacks, right? Okay, we can talk about these tight ends. And with that, I'm going to use the word parity, right? Because we still want to get some of these guys to an elite level. Comes the ability to put stress on teams with being able to use different group personnel groupings that way. And as I've said before, we are not afraid to use multiple personnel groupings any way that we can. How many ever tight ends, receivers, running backs, quarterbacks on the field necessary to help us move the ball effectively down the field. But maybe to your question specifically about individual skill sets, the system is the players. So if your quarterback has this certain skill set, the schemes that you're doing should complement his skill set, not the other way around, right? Okay, and you can say whatever you want. You can say we recruit to a system, or in the NFL they would say that we draft to a system. Okay, at some point your system will be challenged based off the personnel that's available in the room. And so we want to make sure that we're doing a good job and we're always flexible enough to be able to have certain packages grow or expand based off of the ability of our players.
So I guess maybe to boil some of that down, then could you conceive using him elsewhere when the opportunity arises?
Well, we like to have 2 good quarterbacks. Do you know what I mean?
Okay.
Right? You know what I mean? So I don't know if you're insinuating, hey, because of speed, could he be a receiver? Could he take handoffs and stuff like that?
Generally,
Sure he could. But you want to make sure that, because every rep that he takes out there is a rep that he loses playing the quarterback position, right? And so we want to make sure that we have depth in that room, right? And so he's doing it, and he's developed great there. I know Coach has said that. You mentioned, you know, him playing his best football this fall. He has. That's awesome for him.
Competition's been something you and the other coaches have talked a lot about. How have you seen kind of the newcomers and even the quarterback competition just kind of raise the overall level of the offense?
Well, you know, when we start adding depth to a group, okay, it allows you to get more reps, okay, you know, of the things that we're talking about. So let's say you talk about, you know, depth at the receiver position, and you're running a certain scheme or concept that requires 4 receivers to run out there and run a certain route concept. Well, if you only have those 4, that's all you can really ever do with it, right? Well, now if you have 6 or 8 of them, you can go out there and you can get twice as many reps doing the same things. And so when you talk about competition, you talk about depth, and then you talk about reps, and then reps equal development, and that's the kind of program we are. We're a developmental program. So we want to be able to always have players come in here and develop. You don't get to just develop by doing things in the off season and then taking a handful of reps in a practice. You need to have meaningful reps in spring football and fall camp in order for you to grow as a football player. There's 2 times a year where football players, in college at least, I think, grow the most, and it's spring football and fall camp. And for us to go into last spring with a clearer picture, right, or at least, you know, to get some developmental reps, go into fall camp with a much clearer picture than we had a year ago at this time, and I hate talking about the past, but again, I just use it as a frame of reference for people who've been around, players included. You know, we're getting more meaningful reps, which allows us to have more critical development.
And I want to get your opinion on maybe the development of someone like Trevor Cardell, whether it be from the end of spring to now or even going back to when we first got here. How have you seen him grow, and what do you feel like his role could be this fall?
Well, he'll have a role. You know, he played some I'll use the word significant snaps last year, right? He was kind of projected his more of a well-rounded player at tight end spot, and I see that growth continuing happening. He's got the prototypical frame to be a guy who can be used in the perimeter, right, and do things downfield with his size and athleticism. But he's also really embraced some of the things that you asked about before about blocking in the C gap and how well he's done it. So he's attacking in his want to develop in all phases of being a tight end. I wouldn't question it. he definitely wants to be good in his development, and he'll be used that way.
Hey, Andy, name has come up some, this Tanaka stock. What have you seen from him?
A lot of big body contested catches, right? And like a lot of guys who are younger, the reps that they get, sometimes, early, their head can be swimming a little bit, right? And the game's starting to slow down a little bit more for him. But he's making a bunch of contested catches on film, and he is what they're supposed to look like, if that makes sense, okay? And he's a guy that we're really trying to push along and help him develop and grow in all capacities. Him specifically, when I hate talking about individuals because I feel like I leave other guys out, he has grown and matured so much, right? Which is what's supposed to happen in college. But his desire and willingness to go in there and get reps, I'll just give you a specific example. The other night we're doing a walkthrough. And, you kind of have a little rotation of guys going in. Sometimes guys get the reps, sometimes they don't, and have to just learn by observing. He's like, Coach, give us that again. I want to rotate, I want to get this rep. Of course, when fall camp, right, is the routine and consistency starts to challenge your discipline a little bit, and you get into the evening, that time of day, what most college kids are thinking about is going home. He's like, hey, give me another rep of this. Let's call this again. Let's stay out here and do this some more, which it demonstrates his willingness to want to improve and get better and make sure that he's ready to go take the rep and practice the next day.
And also along the offensive line, last week we heard guys are cross-training, doing some different positions and things. Just talk about the O-line. How's that going? And guys moving around?
Yep. So, I think that's something that probably every football team in the country at every level is a challenge they have. It is the most probably sought after position in football, offensive lineman, right? Because people want depth there. They understand the importance of having it. And if you've coached long enough, you know what it's like to coach with a team that doesn't have a developed offensive line. So with that, you're always trying to have, I think, I'll use an NFL example. They usually have 7 or 8 guys in a roster, and they're trying to develop and train them to be able to have individuals play certain spots. That's what we're doing a little bit, right? We want to make sure our best players are on the field and playing regardless of what the rotations or who's available, right? We want to make sure that we're not in a situation, kind of like with the skill personnel, where we're saying, well, hey, this guy can only play that position, we need one there. Too bad that he doesn't play that spot. We want to cross-train them just like we want to do all of our skill players, so that in the event that you need them to be able to step in the field, we're doing that. Puts a little more on their plate mentally, right? Initially coming out the gate, it might slow down their ability to execute right out the gate right away. If you ask a guy to play both guard and tackle or center and guard or whatever it might be. But in the long run, that stuff will start to pay off. At this point in camp, you can already see that starting to pay off, which has been good. And I'm happy with what those guys are doing. I've said this before, I think in this room, championship teams have a couple things in common. And everyone thinks about quarterback play right away, which is really important. But when you look at championship teams, they have good line play on both sides of the ball. And we want to be able to get our program to the point where those are the kind of things we're talking about. So we want to have our line play on both sides of the ball really well developed. And moving guys around will help with that.
Coach, what does it mean for the offense to have to play against a guy like Kenny Logan Jr. in practice?
Well, you should ask Kenny that question, and I bet you would get a better answer. Which you'll have the opportunity to, right? A little bit later this afternoon. It's great. We talk about competition in here internally, and a lot of times the questions here today have been about internally, competition in the receiver room or running back room or the O-line room, wherever it might be. But when you start to have it, offense versus defense, receivers versus DBs, running backs versus linebackers, O-line versus D-line, that's when your quality reps and your development starts to grow exponentially, because you're taking a rep against a good football player. And so to have that out there, have good quality players to be going against in practice matters a lot. But ask Kenny to catch the same question. I'm curious to see what he says. But frame it in a way that would present, like, hey, what's it like to go against Coach K every day? See what he says.
I'll make sure that happens. And then Coach Leipold says you're the only guy that has a video of Jared Casey getting a scholarship. But I was one of the price point for that video.
Well, it's going to start pretty high. Certainly Applebee's, at least, right? A couple of Applebee's gift cards. Yeah, it was great. In their office I forget when it was, actually, last spring, I think. He was emotional. We got to talk to his parents, and, credit to him. He's not running out there and waving a flag, look at me, you know, just speaks to the kind of person him and his family are.
That's awesome. And then I guess lastly for me is there anyone that's stood out from a receiver standpoint in like one-on-ones with the corner safeties?
Well, we brought up Tanaka right earlier, but I tell you that room there is a lot of competition in that room, and on a given day, anyone really can show up and flash to make plays. What we're looking for is the person who can do it over and over and over again. But I don't want to single anyone out because you feel bad. All the guys that we have that have been rotating and all the names that you know on a given day have showed up to make plays and been explosive and making contested catches and playing fast, which is what we need in that room. We need that.
I guess this is the identity question, but I go back to last year when you had that eliminate bad football kind of mantra or whatever it is. Do you have something like that this year? Is there something obvious? And as far as identity goes, I guess, what is it at the end of the game, win or lose, you want to be able to come in here and say, hey, that's what our offense is about?
Well, if you're going to watch our film, a couple things I want you to say was I want to see them go, they're well coached, they're structured, right? Okay, they know how to line up, they know what they're doing. I want people to say, I want opponents to look at our film and say, that's a physical team. Everyone on that football team plays physical. They play hard with great effort. Okay, they know what they're doing. Those are, I guess, staples of any really good offense, in my opinion. Okay, or any good football team. Beyond that, where we'll never stop emphasizing, the avoidance of bad football. Okay, but as I said earlier, the ability to grow from just focusing on that to now growing for our world to being more explosive in winning situational football has been a big emphasis for us this fall camp. We've practiced a lot more situations. Our development in that area through the 3 or 4 weeks or how long we've been here now I've been really pleased with. So in order for us to win close football games, we have to win third down. We have to score touchdowns down in the red zone. We have to generate explosive plays on a 5-6 play drive. Those things are not profound or novel, those things that I just said, but they're really important and critical. And at the end of the day, when you talk about successful teams, that's what they do, right? They don't have, there's nothing sexy about it, right? They know that they're able to generate explosive plays. They know they're not going to create turnovers. They're going to avoid penalties, right? They're going to avoid drop passes. They're going to avoid bad football. They're going to get explosive and score touchdowns. It's not complicated. Yeah, it's easy, right? Okay, just like playing a video game.
Lance had said with Trevor Wilson, in the past maybe he was a guy who at this point in camp, if he hadn't had the big play and the big flash play, he would get really frustrated and try to press a little bit. Now he hasn't done that, but also hasn't seen him really complain about not doing that. Just his growth and maturity in the offense, what do you expect from him now as somebody who's a little bit older and knows what he's going on, and then even as a slot guy, just what the expectations of that role might be?
Well, what you're talking about to me is similar to maybe what we talked about with, Tanaka's growth, is that there's this maturity, right? He's learning how to handle adversity, which is something that we're really trying to put our players through fall camp. Some adversity, we have to respond to that the right way. And so, and he hasn't had a bad camp, He's had moments like when we asked about the receiver question, who showed up and made plays. He's done that as well, right? It's now that there's a few other guys around the room that are doing it as well. And so, he understands he's got a growth mindset. He's going to go out there the next day and just practice right again and to get better. And he asks questions and stays engaged and he wants to improve. And, I have high expectations for him as well as a lot of the other guys in that room, the receiver room. But he's still got some juice, he's still fast. And those are things that you're looking for in receivers, obviously. He's a physical, mature guy, like that way, strong. And so as he continues to develop, those are the kind of things you want to see from him.
Got another wide receiver question for you. With Douglas Emillion, we talked to Coach Samuel. He said that he was adapting pretty well. How have you seen him kind of learn the offense, get a feel with the quarterbacks through the number of practices?
Yep. I could give you a specific example too, like I gave with Tanaka and his growth mindset in the same kind of environment. Hey, coach, let me get this rep here. I want to hear this play. I want to reference this call. I want to walk through this, right? The engagement, the wanting to learn it, like those are great indicators of a young man's ability to succeed or start to learn something. How much do they really want to improve? Again, anyone can show up to the things that are mandatory, but to go beyond and be engaged, those are things that you have to choose to do. And Doug's chose to do those things. And it started when he first got here, right? He's right away said, Coach, we got to learn the playbook. What's this called? What's that called? Why is this? You know what I mean? And then we discussed earlier the fact that he could come into a room where there's, I don't know how many other people that had been here for a year to help him grow That's great. That's what we want from those guys, right? So he is going the right direction, and he's on schedule, if that makes sense.
Is he an inside guy or an outside guy?
Well, kind of like the offensive line, we want to be able to cross-train our guys. Because at the end of the day, based off your personnel that you have on the field, so let's say you have 2 tight ends, 2 receivers. You might line up in a formation that takes one of your traditional outside receivers and puts them in the slot to the field to the boundary, right? So when we do things, 11, 12, 10 personnel, you're going to see those guys hopefully be able to do all of it, right? Okay, we've started probably in the slot with him, right? But you see him take plenty of reps outside as well, based off the personnel.
Sorry, Andy, one more about Bean. I wonder how much you've heard about his speed, whether it's from teammates or on the field after a game, opposing coaches say anything about that to you or not much?
Obviously the amount of practice, so I observe those things, right? And get to work with them every day. Opposing coaches, I probably, when we spend time and investigate what an opponent's going to say in their media discussion, they all talk about him being fast, and him being a high school track guy, and addressing that, knowing that you better take the right angle, otherwise it could go a long way. But beyond that, no one comes up and grabs me. No one goes out of the way and says, "Hey,"
Can't believe it.
yeah. He's fast, though. People know that and recognize that for sure.
Thanks.
Anything else? All right.